For Kate, the house she shared with Ben was beautiful, but soulless. It was the place where she felt most alone. She didn't need luxury. She needed a touch of recognition. Ben's problem wasn't cruelty, but a total absence of presence. His work consumed him, and the only thing that arrived at the dinner table consistently was the glow of his phone screen. Affection had vanished, replaced by hurried pats on the back and transactional questions. Kate felt diminished, almost like a decorative object in her own life. When she booked the masseur, she rationalized it as self-care. But deep down, it was a silent cry for help. The pain in her back was real, but it was just a symptom. That Thursday afternoon, after yet another day of silence and work texts from Ben, Kate booked the massage. It was supposed to be harmless, an escape valve. The exterior was plain, but inside, the air was heavy with the promise of relief. Soft instrumental music mixed with the soothing scent of lavender and sandalwood. Kate settled into a velvet armchair in the lounge, feeling herself relax for the first time in weeks. She was looking for peace. She didn't realize she was looking for danger. A few minutes later, he appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Collins?" The voice was deep and steady, grounded. Kate looked up to see Jim, her therapist. He was significantly taller than she expected, with broad shoulders that seemed to dominate the doorframe. He had an easy, confident stance and a professional smile that somehow quickened Kate's pulse. Nothing was wrong, yet she felt instantly seen. "Yes, that's me," Kate replied, suddenly feeling awkward as she rose. She followed him into the massage room, a dimly lit space with a welcoming warmth. The table was centered, draped in white sheets. Kate gestured toward a chair. "I'll step out for a moment while you get comfortable," he said, in a purely professional tone. "Lie face down under the towel. We'll start shortly." Kate's hands trembled slightly as she undressed. She told herself it was just being exposed to a stranger. But the truth was, it was the anticipation of his touch. She slid onto the table and pulled the towel across her, trying desperately to slow her breathing. Jim returned. His movements were firm and practical, unhurried. He adjusted the table height with a quiet click, a sound that echoed in the silence. Kate tried to focus on the music. He paused next to her, and Kate heard the liquid sound of oil being poured into his palms. That simple sound, along with the rich, warm scent, spiked her anxiety. The oil was meant to relax, but it was making her body tense. And then the silence broke. Jim started at her shoulders. The first press of his strong, warm hands made Kate let out a deep exhale she hadn't realized she was holding. He was kneading away tension she didn't know she carried. His touch was purposeful. "Is the pressure okay?" he asked. His voice was low, almost a whisper near her ear. "Yes," she managed to reply, her voice softer than intended. It was more than okay. It was the first mindful touch she had received in months. At first, Kate focused on the physical relief, the way his thumbs worked the knots. But soon, something shifted. Jim's hands found a rhythm that felt less therapeutic and more intimate. Heat spread across her skin, not just from the oil, but from the awareness that a man was touching her with the full attention Ben hadn't shown in months. A part of her that had been asleep woke with a hungry fire. His strokes became slower, more deliberate. Kate caught herself biting her lip, trying to suppress any movement that might give away her desire. The music filled the room, but it was the sound of Jim's steady breathing she noticed most. When his hands brushed the sides of her rib cage, right at the edge of the towel, Kate's chest tightened. She tried to remain calm, but the truth was undeniable. She didn't want the session to end. Suddenly, Jim leaned in to adjust her arm. Kate caught his reflection in a small wall mirror. For the briefest of moments, their eyes met. It wasn't an accident. He held her gaze just long enough to ignite something reckless in Kate, before looking away as if nothing had happened. Her heart raced. This was supposed to be routine. Yet, she felt she had stepped into dangerous territory, not by action, but by the desire that had just been validated. And, though she couldn't explain why, she found herself hoping his hands would keep wandering. Jim slid his hands down Kate's spine. When he pressed his palms into her lower back, his warmth lingered, spreading through her body. His fingers grazed the edge of the towel at her hips. He didn't cross the line, but he was too close. Kate thought of Ben, the routine dinner, and his distracted eyes. Suddenly, the guilt dissolved into defiance. Why should she feel guilty for being touched this way when her own husband had left her starving? Jim paused. His deep voice resonated low. "Are you comfortable?" Kate knew the question was a formality, but also a test. "Yes," she whispered, the answer too quick. He stepped away for more oil. The sound of the liquid dripping made Kate shiver. When he spread the oil and began working, starting from the outer edges of her thighs and moving inward, her body betrayed her with a subtle tremor. The movements grew slower, more deliberate. Each pass brought his hands closer to the inner part of her legs, stopping just millimeters shy of intimacy. It was teasing, and Kate felt her breathing become shallow. Her mind screamed caution, but her body arched ever so slightly into his touch, as if giving silent permission. Something dormant for years was desperate for this. Jim leaned over to readjust the towel at her back. Kate felt it. Something firm and unmistakable pressed against her hip for the briefest moment. It was intentional. She froze, expecting him to pull away, but he lingered long enough for her to know it wasn't an accident. Kate's silence had become a yes. Jim's hands resumed their journey, but now they carried a different energy, bolder, more intimate. His fingertips brushed along her ribs, slipping subtly beneath the edge of the towel, testing her willingness. Kate closed her eyes. She could have stopped it, pulled the towel tighter, but instead she let out a soft, heavy exhale, allowing the fabric to slip further down. That was all the encouragement he needed. The massage strokes turned into caresses. The muscle work became explicitly sensual. Kate's skin tingled under his hands. For the first time in years, she felt wanted, seen, touched with purpose. Jim leaned in again, his breath grazing her ear. "Relax," he murmured, his voice husky, almost commanding. She obeyed without thinking, her body melting beneath him. The guilt was still there, but it was drowned out by a flood of sensation. He leaned down and his hand slid lower, pressing into her thighs, but this time without hesitation. The touch was firm, audacious. Kate tilted her hips slightly, betraying her craving. A small sound escaped her lips. Jim could not mistake it. He paused for an instant, just long enough for their eyes to meet in the mirror. Then, without a word, his hand slipped beneath the towel, erasing the last of their boundaries. Kate's body trembled with the rush of sensation she had both feared and secretly desired. There was no turning back. When Jim's hand slid beneath the towel, Kate's body jolted. Ben's name flickered in her mind, but it felt like a distant voice she was no longer willing to hear. There was only the intoxicating heat. Jim's movements were deliberate and bold. The air was heavy, saturated with the scent of oil and something more primal. Kate gripped the edges of the table, torn between guilt and surrender. Jim gently guided her, turning her. His eyes locked onto hers in the mirror. No words were exchanged, Everything was communicated in the silence. The hunger, the recklessness, the permission. When their bodies finally came together, it wasn't soft. It was urgent, as if both of them had waited too long. Kate clung to him, her nails digging into his skin. The years of neglect and loneliness poured out of her in waves. Every movement was a betrayal of Ben, and at the same time a liberation for her. What began with oil and massage now burned with a raw intensity. Kate stopped thinking. She just felt. The climax was overwhelming, like breaking free from invisible chains. She bit her lip, muffling the sound, but the tremors in her body betrayed her completely. Jim held her, steady, as the waves of release pulsed through her. And then, silence returned. Kate lay still, breathing heavily. The scent of sandalwood and sweat mingled. Reality crashed back in. She quickly pulled the towel up, clutching it to her chest as if it could shield her from the truth of what had just happened. Jim stepped back. His expression was calm, almost professional again, as if he hadn't just broken the most intimate boundary. He wiped his hands, composed. Kate sat up slowly, her legs trembling with the storm of pleasure, guilt, and fear. "Take your time," Jim said quietly, his voice even and professional once more. Kate nodded, words catching in her throat. As she dressed, her mind spun. What have I done? How could I let this happen? When she finally stepped out, Jim held the door, his demeanor unchanged. To anyone watching, nothing unusual had occurred. The receptionist smiled warmly. "We hope you enjoyed your session, Mrs. Collins. Would you like to schedule your next appointment?" Kate hesitated, her throat dry. She should have run out and vowed never to return. Instead, she forced a small smile and said, "I'll call." The cool evening air hit her face. As she sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly, one thought repeated, "I feel alive again." The guilt was there, but it was drowned out by the intoxicating thrill. The marriage she walked into that morning was not the one she was returning to tonight. And deep down, part of her wasn't sure she wanted it to be. The cautious line between profession and desire was erased, and Kate was left with a devastating question. Would she find herself back in that dimly lit room, craving the hands of the man who had awakened the part of her that was starving? The silence in the house the next morning felt heavier than usual, saturated with the unspoken betrayal of the night before. Kate moved through her routine, making coffee, loading the dishwasher, like a ghost haunting her own kitchen. Every casual glance from Ben, every mindless good morning, felt like a razor-sharp accusation, though he was, as always, completely oblivious, already scrolling through emails before his first sip of coffee. She watched Ben, observing the rigid focus on his phone, the way his jaw worked slightly with professional tension, and the familiar wave of cold apathy washed over her. He truly had no idea. He lived in his own self-created bubble of ambition, and Kate realized with devastating clarity that he hadn't just neglected her, he had made her entirely irrelevant to his world. This realization, sickening and liberating at once, was the justification she needed. The guilt was still there, a simmering coal under her conscience, but it was immediately overpowered by the fierce, intoxicating memory of Jim's hands and the raw, affirming sensation of being wanted. She ran her hand over her lower back, still faintly tingling, and tasted the adrenaline of the forbidden. She thought about Ben's touch, clumsy, quick, and always secondary to his work, and the contrast was overwhelming. That morning, Kate performed the role of the dutiful wife with a disturbing new skill. She asked transactional questions about his schedule, helped him find his misplaced wallet, and smiled politely as he rushed out the door with a quick, impersonal kiss on the forehead. This duplicity felt both exhausting and exhilarating.
She was living a secret life just inches from the man who was supposed to know her best. She was a master liar, and the secret made her feel powerful. The decision was inevitable. She had tasted freedom and could not go back to the cage. By 10 a.m., she was staring at the clinic's number, her thumb hovering over the dial button. Booking another massage was easy. She just claimed she needed further work on her shoulders. But when the receptionist asked, Kate specified, in a voice she barely recognized, that she would only accept Jim for the session. She had just bought herself a few more hours of life. If you're captivated by Kate's dangerous secret, you can't miss what happens next. The stakes are about to get terrifyingly high, and you don't want to miss a single shocking detail. Hit that subscribe button right now and be the first to know how this desperate story unfolds. The first call wasn't about therapy. It was about securing an escape route and a dangerous new co-conspirator. However, the true danger wasn't Ben discovering her affair. It was the intense, magnetic hold Jim was already establishing over her entire emotional landscape. Kate didn't wait long to schedule that next therapy session. She had only bought herself an emotional lifeline, and she desperately needed to breathe the air Jim offered. But their second meeting wasn't about the clinic. It was a coffee shop across town, a deliberately bland, neutral location where two strangers could meet without drawing any suspicion. The first sight of him, sitting alone by the window, sent a familiar, thrilling jolt of panic and anticipation through her body, confirming this was more than just lust. When Jim looked up and saw her, the smile that broke across his face wasn't the polite, professional one from the clinic. It was raw, magnetic, and completely unguarded. In that instant, Kate felt a validation so profound it physically ached. He didn't ask her about her back pain or her stress levels. He asked her about her favorite book, about the things she missed doing. Questions Ben hadn't bothered to ask in 5 years. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, moving through shared laughter and deep, recognizing glances that spoke volumes. Jim didn't try to rationalize what had happened on the table. He simply acknowledged the undeniable connection they both felt, treating her desire not as a mistake, but as a natural, beautiful force. He made her feel smart, fascinating, and most crucially, worth the risk they were both taking. The moment he reached across the table, not to take her hand, but just to graze her wrist, a jolt of electricity shot up her arm. It was a subtle, almost innocent gesture, but it held more genuine affection and powerful intent than all of Ben's distracted, peck-on-the-cheek kisses combined. This was her oxygen. This was the genuine human connection she had been starved of, finally being fed after years of emotional famine. She left that coffee shop feeling like she had just taken her first real breath. The thought of going home to the heavy silence and the judgmental glow of Ben's phone was suddenly intolerable. But the prospect of seeing Jim again was an all-consuming fire. She had crossed the line of infidelity, and now she was sprinting away from her old life, powered by the reckless rush of this forbidden affair. She thought the affair would be a simple release valve for her stress, a temporary escape. She hadn't yet realized that the price of this freedom would be a direct confrontation with the most toxic elements of her marriage, forcing her to see Ben for the narcissistic man he truly was.
Kate walked into her immaculate home that evening, the vibrant memory of Jim's presence still clinging to her, only to be immediately confronted by the numbing apathy of her marriage. Ben was on the sofa, laptop open, scrolling through a news feed while half watching some muted program on TV. He glanced up, barely, and simply asked if she'd picked up the dry cleaning, his voice devoid of warmth or curiosity about her day. This immediate return to the transactional reality was a physical blow. The contrast between Jim's complete attention and Ben's selective inattention was stark, acting as a mirror reflecting the ugliness of their union. She saw not just neglect, but a profound self-absorption. Ben treated their home like a hotel staffed by a helpful and free employee, totally unaware of the deep emotional chasm widening beneath his feet. The conversation that night, or rather the lack of one, quickly spiraled into a typical argument. Kate tried to share a small anecdote about her day, hoping for a simple moment of connection, but Ben cut her off mid-sentence to discuss a minor office crisis. When Kate mildly protested his interruption, his expression didn't show remorse or understanding. It showed annoyance and cold condescension. "Don't be dramatic, Kate," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just work. You tend to exaggerate things." That dismissive phrase, "you tend to exaggerate things," was his signature move, a narcissistic tool used to gaslight her into questioning her own reality. It was designed to make her feel overly emotional and therefore inherently unreliable. The ensuing argument wasn't about betrayal, it was about Ben's refusal to acknowledge her feelings. He didn't shout, he just froze her out, using cold logic and detachment to belittle her emotional needs. This wasn't a marriage, it was a perpetual performance where Ben was the star and Kate was merely the stagehand, desperate for a genuine line. Kate retreated to the bedroom, the adrenaline of her clandestine meeting suddenly replaced by a sickening sense of entrapment. She hated this life. She hated the routine arguments. And yet, the thought of actually saying, "I want a divorce," felt paralyzing. She was trapped by years of emotional dependency, unaware that her silent cry for separation would soon escalate into a public humiliating disaster. The emotional whiplash between the two men became Kate's new, dangerous routine. Her life with Ben was spent walking on emotional eggshells, dreading the next moment of dismissal or the cold shoulder. Her life with Jim was spent soaring, basking in validation, and planning increasingly elaborate clandestine meetings. Quick lunches in remote parks, late-night phone calls hidden in the bathroom, stolen hours in inexpensive, anonymous hotels. The affair quickly moved beyond the physical. It became an intense emotional dependency. Jim wasn't just her lover, he was her therapist, her confidant, and the only person who saw her as Kate, not as Ben's invisible wife. He listened without judgment, he celebrated her thoughts, and he never once made her feel like a burden or an exaggeration. This sustained validation fueled her courage, but it also deepened the sense of constant, pervasive guilt. Kate became a master of deception. She invented fake book club meetings, late errands, and mandatory overtime at a job that didn't demand it. The lies were small and frequent, weaving a complex tapestry of secrecy that she carefully maintained. She noticed, with a chilling lack of surprise, how easy it was to lie to Ben. He never really listened, so he never found the gaps in her stories. But the facade was taking a toll. Every time she kissed Ben hello or goodbye, she felt a profound surge of self-disgust. The energy required to maintain the normalcy of her marriage while simultaneously investing completely in her secret life was exhausting. She often found herself staring at Ben, wondering how long it would take for him to finally notice the stranger who had replaced his wife. The irony was brutal. Her affair was meant to be an escape from the toxicity of her marriage, but the secrecy itself was creating a new, internal toxicity. She realized her life had become a precarious two-sided coin, forever fearing the moment it would flip and expose her. The truth was, she was becoming addicted to the high-stakes drama of her double life.
Kate was convinced Trish's secret was perfectly sealed, but a single, careless mistake, a slip of the tongue during a routine phone call, was about to unravel the entire fragile structure of her carefully constructed deception.
Kate's reliance on Jim quickly morphed from a desperate escape into a vital necessity. She felt like an astronaut tethered to a life support cord. Jim was the oxygen, and her marriage to Ben was the suffocating vacuum of space. The validation she received in their stolen moments was so absolute that it made the silent condescension of her home life unbearable. She was constantly comparing the two men, and Ben was failing every single crucial test. The arguments with Ben weren't just about his distraction anymore. They were a direct result of Kate's simmering resentment and her own toxic defensiveness. She would snap over minor things, a misplaced key, a comment about the dinner menu, because she was tired of being treated like an invisible supporting character. Ben's reaction was always the same, a detached, infuriating logic that dismissed her anger as proof of her irrationality. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Kate. Just calm down." One afternoon, while meticulously planning their next rendezvous, Jim called her during a time she had marked as safe. Ben was ostensibly working in his home office, a fortress of soundproof glass and high-end equipment. Kate whispered into the phone, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement, detailing an elaborate lie she would use to meet Jim later that day. In her rush, as she was describing the alleged work crisis that required her sudden presence downtown, Kate accidentally used one of Jim's private nicknames for her. It was a small, tender word they had created, full of intimacy and meaning. She immediately corrected herself, covering the slip with a cough and a rushed change of subject, but a sick feeling of dread settled in her stomach. She ended the call, her hand shaking, and told herself it was fine. Ben was buried in his world, his office door was closed, and she had corrected the mistake instantly. But later that night, as she was scrolling through a mundane photo album, Ben casually walked in and asked not about her day, but about the details of that work crisis. His eyes, for once, were not on his phone, but fixed on her face with a disconcerting, calculating intensity. He didn't mention the slip or the nickname, but the sudden, hyper-focused attention felt worse than his usual neglect. Kate felt a chill of paranoia spread through her, realizing she had given away a tiny, vital piece of evidence. She smiled, lied effortlessly about the crisis, and wondered if the price of her brief freedom was about to cost her everything she had left. The fear ignited by Ben's unexpected scrutiny quickly blossomed into full-blown paranoia. Kate began reviewing every conversation, every text message, and every fabricated alibi she had used over the past weeks. She obsessively worried that the small slip of the tongue, the nickname, was not forgotten, but was instead an unseen shadow Ben was now tracking. Ben, ironically, reverted to his most toxic, dismissive self. He wasn't overtly hostile, but his neglect became a weapon. He would make dinner plans and then cancel at the last minute for a crucial meeting, offering only a vague, detached apology. He'd stand physically close to Kate, but be miles away emotionally, his mind clearly preoccupied with his work, leaving Kate feeling utterly eclipsed by his ambition. The truth is, this behavior was just Ben's normal routine, but Kate's guilty conscience interpreted every action as a calculated move. She started hiding her phone under pillows, clearing her browsing history several times a day, and carefully changing her perfume before seeing Jim, terrified that a lingering scent of lavender or sandalwood might betray her. During this time, her emotional anchor was, predictably, Jim. She confessed her increasing paranoia to him during one of their stolen hours, needing his reassurance. Jim, bless his heart, was the perfect antidote. He was calm, affirming, and told her that her feelings were valid, not exaggerated. He told her she deserved better, gently pushing her towards the separation she knew was inevitable. However, Jim was also getting frustrated. He was fully invested and openly yearned for a life without secrecy. The beautiful escape he offered was slowly transforming into its own kind of pressure cooker, one that demanded Kate finally take the terrifying leap. He was ready to stop living in the shadows. Kate knew Jim was right.
She couldn't sustain this double life any longer. But she would soon realize that escaping Ben wasn't just about signing divorce papers. It was about escaping a man who would fight dirty to keep control, even of something he no longer wanted.
The mounting tension became a physical illness. Kate was losing sleep and weight, constantly on edge. She decided that the only way to alleviate the pressure was to finally set the wheels in motion for a separation. Gathering every ounce of courage, she waited for Ben to be in a rare, calm mood and brought up the subject of their unhappiness. Her attempt at an honest, vulnerable conversation was met not with anger, but with a chillingly pragmatic response. Ben didn't engage with the emotional core of her plea. He immediately shifted the conversation to financial logistics. He didn't ask why she was unhappy. He asked how she expected to manage the mortgage, the bills, and the cost of maintaining her current lifestyle. "You need to be realistic, Kate," he said, folding his hands and looking at her with a patronizing pity that cut deeper than any shout. "I control all the investments. Do you really think you can afford to leave? You'd lose everything." This wasn't concern. It was a threat veiled as financial advice. He was using his control over their shared wealth to paralyze her. In that moment, Kate understood the true nature of the toxicity. It wasn't just the emotional neglect, but the financial chokehold he had intentionally created. Ben had always managed everything, keeping Kate dependent, ensuring she never needed to know the details. His narcissism meant he couldn't stand the thought of her leaving because it was a rejection of him, and he would use any leverage to prevent that humiliation. She was utterly defeated. She had underestimated his power and her own terrifying vulnerability. Kate retreated, the momentum for separation instantly extinguished by the sheer weight of financial fear. She cried not out of sadness for her marriage, but out of fury at her own helplessness and the clever, insidious way Ben had trapped her. She swallowed the pain and the resentment, realizing she had traded the emotional cage for a golden one. Kate would soon find that Jim, her savior, was also about to feel the crushing weight of her predicament, forcing him to make a desperate choice. The financial reality had slammed the door shut on Kate's immediate escape plans, injecting a corrosive stress into her relationship with Jim. She could only offer him stolen moments and whispered apologies, explaining her paralysis with the chilling details of Ben's financial threats. Jim, who had initially been her calm, reassuring anchor, began to show the strain of being the secret life and the other man. He tried to be understanding, but his frustration grew palpable. The future they talked about, a real shared life, felt perpetually out of reach, trapped behind Ben's financial fortress. He had invested his heart and his time, and the constant secrecy was no longer sustainable for him. Their intimate conversation started to include moments of sharp tension and unspoken accusations of fear. During one particularly strained phone call, Jim presented his ultimatum. "I can't live like this indefinitely, Kate. I need to know you're fighting for us. If you can't even tell Ben you want a divorce, how can you expect me to wait forever?" His voice wasn't angry, but it was firm and final, placing the entire burden of their future squarely on her shaking shoulders. This was a brutal turning point. Jim's pressure felt entirely unfair, yet Kate knew he was right. She was caught between Ben's powerful, paralyzing control and Jim's very real demand for commitment. Her savior was now forcing her hand, transforming the beautiful refuge of their affair into another source of stress and obligation. Kate felt the crushing weight of having two relationships demanding everything from her, while she had nothing left to give. The life she had desperately sought to simplify was now exponentially more complicated, and she was the only one paying the true emotional toll. She was facing the terrifying truth. Freedom comes with an expiry date. Kate desperately needed a sign, a catastrophic event that would force Ben's hand and break the financial chains holding her captive. She didn't know that she was about to get exactly what she wished for, but the disaster would be far more public and humiliating than she could ever have imagined.
The catastrophic event Kate subconsciously yearned for arrived not as a whisper, but as a public, humiliating explosion. The opportunity arose during a mandatory company gala that Ben reluctantly attended every year, forcing Kate to dress up and perform the role of the devoted, happy spouse. She hated these events, but tonight she had a terrifying secret to guard, adding a layer of high-stakes anxiety to the performance. The night started innocently enough. Ben, fueled by cocktails and the need to network, was in his element, charming, loud, and utterly dominant in conversation. Kate drifted slightly apart, trying to maintain a safe distance and avoid his inevitable moments of patronizing correction. She was speaking with a small group of colleagues' wives, feeling momentarily safe, when Ben suddenly joined their circle. Ben, aiming for a laugh, began telling a story about Kate. It wasn't about the affair, but about a minor mistake she'd made regarding their travel plans months ago. He exaggerated her error, making her sound scatterbrained and incompetent, all while pretending it was a charming anecdote. The women forced awkward smiles, but Kate felt her blood run cold. When she tried to interject and calmly correct the details, Ben immediately cut her off, his eyes flashing with a silent, cold warning. "Oh, don't interrupt, darling. You know you always get the dates wrong. It's best if you let me handle the facts." He said this with a fake, indulgent smile, effectively silencing and humiliating her in front of their peers, proving his need for control was absolute, even in trivial social settings. The public shaming was a turning point. Kate excused herself and went to the restroom, trembling not just from the humiliation, but from a fierce, clarifying rage. That moment stripped away the last veneer of doubt. This was a toxic relationship, rooted in Ben's need to belittle her. She was not leaving a decent man. She was escaping an emotional tyrant. Kate realized she could no longer protect Ben's image, nor her own sanity. She walked out of that restroom and made a decision, one fueled by anger, not fear, that would finally set her on the irreversible path to confrontation. Kate returned from the restroom, the fire of outrage burning brightly beneath her forced calm. The humiliation had been the final, necessary jolt. She was done protecting Ben's fragile ego and enduring his public dismissals. She found him holding court with a group of investors mid-story, completely unaware of the shift that had just occurred within his wife. She walked straight up to him and with a calm, steely voice that surprised even herself, interrupted his story in mid-sentence. "Ben," she said, cutting through the laughter, "I need to talk to you right now. It can't wait." The room went silent. Ben's smile vanished, replaced with the same cold, intense warning glare she had seen the night of her mistake. He was enraged by the public disrespect. "Not now, Kate," he hissed under his breath, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "Go sit down. We'll discuss this later." He was trying to assert his dominance through a quiet threat, but his power over her had evaporated. She looked him straight in the eye, defying his unspoken command. "No," she repeated, her voice firm, refusing to whisper. "I am done. I want a divorce." The word divorce hung in the stunned silence of the gala hall, sharp and clear. The investors looked away instantly, and Ben's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally, a terrifying, controlled fury. His greatest fear, public humiliation, had just been realized by his own wife. Ben grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly tight, and pulled her toward the exit. "You are coming home with me now," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. But Kate wrenched her arm free.
She looked at the circle of embarrassed faces and then back at Ben, her gaze unwavering. She grabbed her small purse, turned her back on him and the silent, judging room, and walked out of the gala, leaving behind not just a party, but a life she no longer recognized. She thought the hardest part was over, but the legal battle was about to reveal the true depths of Ben's narcissistic cruelty.
Kate spent that night at a friend's house, the adrenaline from the public confrontation slowly giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The next morning, she hired a lawyer recommended by Jim, ready to face the financial battle she knew Ben would wage. She was emotionally prepared for anger, for shouting, and for arguments, but she was entirely unprepared for Ben's icy, calculated retaliation. He didn't scream or beg. Instead, he systematically cut her off. By noon, Kate couldn't access any of their joint bank accounts. The credit cards were declined. The only car she drove was suddenly reported as unavailable through the dealership's app, rendering it useless. He was executing the financial chokehold he had threatened, doing it with swift, professional detachment. Her lawyer was grim. Ben was using his extensive corporate contacts and financial control to make Kate's life instantly unlivable. He filed a counterpetition claiming emotional instability due to the affair he had somehow already discovered, twisting the truth to paint Kate as the reckless party. The paranoia Kate had dismissed months ago was now revealed to be a terrible reality. Ben had been watching, waiting. The shock was twofold: the speed of his revenge and the chilling realization that Ben hadn't truly loved her. He had merely viewed her as a valuable asset that could not be sold or devalued without his permission. The affair hadn't destroyed the marriage. Ben's toxic control had. But the affair gave him the perfect legal weapon. Jim was horrified and supportive, but his presence also became a complication. Ben's lawyer was using Jim's profession and their clandestine meetings to aggressively paint Kate as an unfit, irresponsible spouse. The financial pressure was immediate and debilitating, forcing Kate to face the terrifying prospect of starting over with nothing. Kate knew she needed a steady hand to navigate this disaster. She'd been searching for love, but now she needed a ruthless pragmatist. She would soon realize that Jim, the passionate lover, was entirely unprepared for the brutal reality of a divorce war. The legal war intensified, and the financial pressure began to seriously affect Kate's refuge, her relationship with Jim. Jim was supportive and attended every difficult meeting he could, but the reality of the situation was too brutal for the romantic fantasy they had built. Their beautiful, secret bubble of passion was being contaminated by Ben's ugly legal maneuverings. Jim, the man who had seen Kate as the beautiful validation of his own existence, now saw her increasingly as a liability. The constant discussions about legal fees, Ben's threats, and the potential impact on Jim's own professional license due to the unethical nature of their initial relationship began to wear him down. He started to become distant and preoccupied, retreating into the same protective shell Ben often occupied. Kate noticed the signs immediately. Calls became shorter, physical meetings less frequent and more subdued. The man who saw her, listened to her, and cherished her emotional needs was slowly disappearing, replaced by a partner stressed by circumstance. During a painful coffee meeting, Jim finally admitted his fear. Ben's lawyers were threatening to involve the clinic and expose his misconduct. "I can't lose everything, Kate," he admitted, his eyes filled with genuine fear, not anger. "I'm fighting for you, but I need a career to build a life with you. This divorce is destroying me too." His words were logical, but they were the death knell of their romance. Kate felt an
agonizing déjà vu. The man she loved was prioritizing self-preservation and career over her emotional distress. Kate looked at Jim and realized the terrible, heartbreaking truth. She hadn't escaped the toxicity of her marriage, only to repeat the pattern. She had found a true connection, but she had lost it to the very fear of ruin that had initially paralyzed her.
The clarity arrived with devastating, icy precision. Kate realized that while Jim genuinely loved her, he was not the immovable rock she needed for the war ahead. He was a kind, emotional man, perfectly suited for the quiet space of an affair, but completely unfit for the brutality of a divorce from a narcissistic manipulator like Ben. Their passionate connection was beautiful, but it lacked the resilience needed for survival. She made the hardest decision of all. She ended things with Jim. It wasn't because she stopped loving him. It was because she had to save herself. She told him that she needed to focus entirely on her financial survival and that the continued risk to his career was a weight she could no longer bear. She needed a clean break to fight Ben without distraction. The final goodbye was quiet and profoundly sad, lacking the drama of their affair's beginning. There were no shouts, only the crushing silence of two people who recognized that timing and circumstance had been crueler than either of them. Jim finally understood. He was just another man she had to let go of to truly be free. Kate stood alone, stripped of her husband, her assets, and now her lover. The terror was overwhelming, but it was coupled with a strange, fierce sense of self-reliance. The divorce was still ongoing, ugly and relentless, but Kate's focus shifted entirely. She stopped fighting for assets she knew Ben would weaponize and started fighting for knowledge, learning to manage money, building her own credit, and securing her independence. The profound lesson was this: she had not needed a lover to escape her husband. She had needed herself. The affair was the spark that ignited the courage, but the fire of self-reliance was the only thing that could burn down the cage. She was no longer fighting for a relationship. She was fighting for her autonomy. She had sacrificed the man she loved to survive the man she was leaving. But Kate was about to learn that the true victory wasn't in winning the divorce. It was in the unexpected and deeply personal resolution that followed. The divorce finally concluded 6 months later, not with a bang, but with a defeated sigh of paperwork. Kate received far less than she deserved. Ben had fought viciously, determined to leave her with as little as possible. He won the financial battle, but in doing so, he lost the final piece of his power over her. Kate signed the papers, feeling not anger, but a profound, overwhelming relief. Ben, in his final act of self-absorption, told Kate he hoped she learned her lesson about being dramatic and making rash decisions. She looked at him, so successful, so controlled, yet utterly alone, and offered him a genuine, peaceful smile. She didn't respond. She didn't need to justify her reality anymore. Her freedom was its own proof. The real victory was internal. Kate found a small apartment, enrolled in financial management courses, and started working long hours. She was poor, exhausted, and burdened with debt, but she was unquestionably her own person. She had rebuilt her life not on the validation of a man, but on the bedrock of her own effort. The shame of the affair was replaced by a quiet pride in her resilience. Years later, Kate received an unexpected email. It was from Jim. He hadn't reached out to reignite the romance. He simply wrote to tell her that he had followed her struggle through mutual contacts and that he was proud of the woman she had become. He confessed that their affair had taught him the importance of being fully present, both professionally and personally, and that he was now married, truly happy, and finally ready for commitment. Kate smiled, recognizing the beautiful irony. The affair, born of desperation and betrayal, had ultimately saved 3 lives.
It forced Ben to face his isolation, forced Jim to grow up, and most importantly, it forced Kate to become the hero of her own story. The greatest lesson she learned was that courage often looks like carelessness, and sometimes the only way to escape a prison built of love is to burn the whole thing down.